Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sherry Cook, Senior Program Manager with AASLH. We are very happy to have you with us this afternoon for the webinar, What is Visitors Count?, to provide information about AASLH's Visitor Survey Program. The American Association for State and Local History is a national organization that provides leadership and support for its members who preserve and interpret state and local history in order to make the past more meaningful to all people. Just a few things to note as we get ready to begin. The chat box, as most of you probably are aware, is in the lower left corner of the screen, and it's for asking questions and communicating both with speakers and other webinar participants. If by chance you are hearing an echo, make sure you are logged in only once. We recommend that you close all other windows in your browser to help with bandwidth. If you have other sound issues, you may need to close out, reboot, and log back in. And of course, with the variety of hardware and connections that are all over the place, there's always the possibility for some minor glitches, so your understanding is appreciated. We are recording today's webinar, and everyone registered will receive the recording link within 24 hours. So then you can review the recording, share it with others, and use it for further and future information. I want to welcome my co-presenter for this afternoon. Deb Wilcox is Senior Research Consultant at the Center for Nonprofit Management in Nashville. AASLH and CNM partner to offer the Visitors Count program. And no, that's not a typo on the screen. Deb does spell her first name with a lowercase d, in case anyone's wondering. I want to do another just quick sound check. Can you all hear me? Yes, okay. Just want to make sure. Okay, so let's get started. There's usually no shortage of opinions on what your museum or your historic site should be doing, and maybe what it should not be doing. And I'm sure most of you are nodding your heads in agreement with that. You may have staff, volunteers, or board members, or other stakeholders, people in the community, people weighing in on program development, exhibit planning, marketing, strategic planning. But who is speaking for the people who matter most to your museum or site? I remember back a number of years ago when I worked as curator for a county historical society that routinely several of us on staff, and maybe once in a while a board member sitting in also, sitting around the table, usually eating lunch or having a meeting, and making a lot of assumptions about what our visitors wanted, what they expected, and what would make them loyal friends of our historical society. We didn't really ever think 20, 30 years ago to ask our visitors. We missed the target probably more times than we realized. And we placed a lot of emphasis on annual visitation counts. And while annual attendance is certainly important, we relied far too much on it to define our success. Yes, those annual and attendance figures are important, but they don't tell the story of your visitor's experience. It's very one-dimensional. At another place where I worked, a larger institution, we often defined our success by whether we survived budget cuts. Did we by chance increase our budget? Whether we met internal goals and objectives. Certainly didn't have a lot to do with visitors. Mostly what were the projects we accomplished during the year? What programs did we give? Name of program, attendance number maybe, date maybe, and that was about it. Again, those are all important measurements, but they do very little to gauge long-term success of the museum, point us in the right direction for improvements, or tell us more about our visitors. Again, what they like, what they don't like, what they expect. Will they come back? So Visitors Count is a program that helps organizations collect that so valuable data and feedback from visitors so that a museum or site can not only measure its success and communicate its strengths, but also identify those opportunities for improvement. And so there are lots of different areas of operation where Visitors Count data and feedback can inform your decision making. Again, like you see up on the screen, marketing, program development, fundraising, and we're going to show you examples of several of these different areas and how real museums, real case studies today, what they found out from using Visitors Count. So Visitors Count, we've been around since 2006. We offer 3 different survey choices. There's the Gate Visitor Survey. That's our most popular survey program. There's the Teacher Survey, and that's for teachers who bring student classes on site for a program. And then there's the Spotlight Survey, which is a specialized survey available to those organizations that have used the Gate Visitor Survey. So today's presentation is going to focus mainly on the Gate Visitor Survey, but I'll be providing some information about the Teacher and Spotlight surveys later in the webinar when we talk about fees and some other details. But what I want to say that for our Gate and Teacher surveys, the majority of the questions that are on the survey instrument are drawn from a standard instrument that AASLH tested and refined with pilot museums over the course of several years. Standardization of the questions allows us to develop benchmarks, and those benchmarks help participating museums compare their survey results with institutions of similar size and scope. And Deb's going to be talking a lot more about benchmarks in just a few minutes. But again, there are 3 survey options, and coming up here in June, we'll be starting the summer-fall survey for the Gate Visitor Survey, and then in August, the Teacher Survey will begin. So just to give you an idea, for the Gate Visitor Survey, the typical survey plan for organizations that take part in Visitors Count and what the program fee covers is a total of 200 surveys. And so for the session that's coming up here starting in June, participating organizations collect 100 surveys in the summer season, which is defined as July 10th through Labor Day, and then 100 surveys in the fall. And that's post-Labor Day through November 15th. And as you see the note on the lower part of the slide, if winter is a significant visitation time, we can tailor survey plans to meet your needs for a winter season of surveying. We do lots of tailoring of survey plans for organizations. We have some organizations that want to survey more than 2 seasons. Maybe they do want summer, fall, and winter, or winter, spring, and summer. We do lots of tailoring. So if you're interested in Visitors Count and you want to talk with us about something special. Maybe you want to increase the number of surveys you collect or anything like that. We are happy to talk with you about that. But now I want to turn the mic over to Deb Wilcox, and Deb is going to start talking about the unique feature that AASLH's visitors count offers, and that is benchmarking. So Deb, I'm going to let you go ahead and take over.
All right. Can everybody hear me? I'm assuming yes.
I can hear.
Okay, good, thanks. So visitors count offers benchmarking, and we felt early on that that was a really critical part of understanding one's ratings and how one fits in terms of are they above average, not quite average, where are they? So we define benchmarks as a mean rating, and we calculate it for each of our museums and historic sites in our database, which we'll soon have, as soon as this current group is done, we'll have 182 different museums and over 35,000 visitors, which allows us to slice and dice the data and give us benchmarks that are maybe more specific to everybody's particular situation. So what does benchmarks do, or what can they do? They can evaluate your performance in the context of other museums, take into account your circumstances, and set ambitious and attainable goals. And let me show you what that might look like. These are actual ratings from a museum, an anonymous museum. We're very careful about sharing information, so your information will be safe with us. So this is Museum XYZ, and I will tell you that it happens to be a historic house with an annual budget of $200,000 to $400,000. And these are their ratings. So on visitor focus, they got a 9. On presentation, they got an 8.5, and so forth. And if you look at this chart just by itself, one would be tempted to say, oh my gosh, we do really great with visitors focus and presentation. Amount of media is like, oh my gosh, it's terrible. We need to do something about that. So that's what would happen if you just had that information. But if we put it in the context of, say, historic houses, which is what I did for this example, the museum in question, the historic house in question, is in teal, and our benchmarks for all historic house museums in our database at that point in time is in purple. So if we look at how we did, we'll look at visitor focus. We did really well on that. As a matter of fact, it's at parity with across all historic houses. When we look at presentation, however, we find that, in fact, we are statistically below what the average across all historic houses, what their score would be. So there's an opportunity there where we thought maybe we were doing great, and you were, but this suggests one could do better. And the same thing happened for stimulating, and the question is about stimulating to learn more about a specific topic. The same with my history, which is obviously why I chose these examples, but my history is something about, does a good job of presenting history as it relates to me. So while these things looked really good and sound, and they're not bad, they are below the curve, if you will. But when we get to amount of media, where one would be really tempted to say, oh my gosh, we have to spend a bunch of money. And I usually use the example of, the museums don't have budgets like Coca-Cola or McDonald's. So we can't expect them to have a 9 or a 10. So in fact, the amount of media that people have seen about this particular site is right at par with what people see about historic houses in general. So they're not really behind the curve after all. Does that mean they shouldn't put more money in media? Of course not. But it does take those ratings and put it in perspective so that you know where you really do excel and where maybe there's an opportunity that you might have not noticed if we didn't have that benchmarking capability. And because we've got 182 different museums, we're able to slice and dice these data in a bunch of different ways. We don't tell you who's in what benchmark. We maintain all that confidentiality. It takes 5 sites to create a benchmark. And it also kind of anchors things to let you know, let's say I want to look at my history and I want to get a 10. Well, that's probably not likely. And we do some stuff with the top 3 performers. Again, we never identify anybody. But it kind of puts things back into perspective so that you know how you're doing in the context of the world in which you function. So that's one big important part. The other part that is unique to us, as far as I know, and it's kind of my favorite, I have to admit, we determine statistically what are the key drivers to a successful visit at any particular museum. And what's fascinating about it is it's all over the map in terms of what those key drivers are. So those items which best predict the overall successful visit from a museum by their visitors, we classify as key drivers. So key drivers are very unique to each museum and historic site. And when I say very unique, we've done historic houses in the same neighborhood, and we have found out that the key drivers for historic houses very near each other aren't necessarily the same. And in fact, they tend to be quite different. They're usually different for local visitors and those coming from far away. And that makes sense. People who are maybe local visitors may be coming more often, maybe more familiar with the site. Different things are critical to that experience than maybe those visitors who are coming on a summer vacation or something like that, visiting in town with friends. They're critical. And when I say they're critical, those are the things that could make or break the experience for your visitors. And those are the things that if you don't do as well on as you wish, maybe some of those things that we talked about a minute ago from the benchmarking, those are the things that you want to focus on improving. And if you do very well in an area, those are the areas which you build upon, where you create marketing strategies or you use in funding or things of that sort. You protect and communicate those that you do well, and you prioritize for improvement those things in which you have an opportunity to do so. They help you better understand your visitors' needs and wants. We all think we know what's critical to a visitor, and we all have our ideas. And we find out in reality that it's something else altogether. And we've had that experience with museums who've gone through the program that, oh my gosh, I would have guessed it was X and found out it was Y. So it really is a good way to help focus your efforts on the most critical things. Communicate strengths. We talked about that just for a minute. Allocate precious resources to have the greatest positive impact. And that goes along with avoiding using resources in areas unlikely to produce the positive bump that you had hoped to do by changing something. Creates credibility with funders. You can go to funders and say, we know this is critical to our site. We know we do well in it. Help us build upon that, things of that sort. And most importantly, it includes the visitor in your strategic planning efforts. They need to come to the table. They're your ultimate success stories, if you will, your ultimate opportunities. And there is no real report of key drivers. Instead, what we do is list them. So here are some key drivers for this XYZ museum, which is a different museum than the historic house a few minutes ago. So we'll just kind of reset that needle and think about another mysterious museum. So if I had the answer to question 2, which is impact, question 3, which is meeting expectations, not being disappointed, question 13, which is presentation, and staff and volunteers, I could correctly predict, well, my computer could correctly predict 75% of the time with accuracy whether they loved their museum visit, liked their museum visit, or maybe not so much. So these are the things that that museum could work on either to improve or to build upon in terms of strategy, to build upon in terms of fundraising, things of that sort. And so I want to tell you real briefly the cues here that we use stands for a question number. It happened to be question number 2 on our questionnaire. And I know Sherry talked a little bit about the common questions that we have on all of our questionnaires. And I think there are about 28 now that we ask of all visitors in all situations. And because we have those answers to all those rating type questions, those are the ones that also allow us to benchmark as well as create these key drivers. So I just wanted to tell you what Q was. And so in this presentation today, we're using labels rather than the whole question, but there's a question that relates to those labels. Here's another couple of examples that I'm just going to show you about your report. We try very hard to make the report as user-friendly and intuitive as possible. So this page summarizes some data from a fictitious museum. And so the question appears to the left of the bar graph. And then I use dark green means go. Dark green means, oh my gosh, you did really well. Those are the percentages of people who give you a 9 or a 10. And I use a 10-point scale. I'm going to insert this here because I don't know who of you maybe collect data on your own, but there is a certain percentage of the population who tend not to give the top ratings. So if you're only using a 5, or the lower end for that matter, so if you are using a questionnaire that's got 5 options for a rating question, there's a percentage of people, it's between 15 and 20%, who don't give the highest and the lowest ratings, so they've only got 3 choices. So we use a scale of 0 to 10 so that everybody can find a choice that works for them. So the dark green on this particular graph is what we want to maximize. We want as big a number as we can, is those percentages who gave you a 9 or a 10. Then the light green are those who give you a 7 or an 8. Pretty good. The white is the neutral. Those are the people who fall in the middle of the scale and give you a 4 to a 6. And the negatives, the red flags, are what we want to minimize. And those are the people who give you a low rating, a 0 to a 3. And I'm going to talk first just a second again about media. And I'm going to tell you, every single museum is going to have a red flag in media. I mean, you're not McDonald's. McDonald's may even have a red flag in media. I don't know. But that's why it's important to look at these ratings, but then put it in the context of what do museums like me get. We used Historic House with a budget of 200 to 400K as an example, but we can compare these numbers, if it's media or whichever one of these we want to choose, against a whole bunch of different things. It can be historic houses, it can be history museums, it can be military museums, it can be Civil War sites, it can be, we've got a big long list, and it can be state versus private nonprofit versus city, federal. We have those as benchmarks. Region of the U.S. New England and Mid-Atlantic and Southeast and so on. And in some cases, we have benchmarks by state. So we have benchmarks, let me see, by how much people pay to go through the museum, what your admission fees are. So we can take these basic ideas of how did you do and put it in the context of how do I do versus others like me in some way. And again, the others like you are not identified, but we do tell you how many there are in each particular benchmark. Another thing that we look at, I don't know how many of you have looked at crosstabs until you're green in the face, but we do look at differences in the ratings between people under different circumstances. And in my example, I've got spring versus summer, weekday versus weekend, and people coming from more than 120 miles away and those coming from within that mile radius. And what I've done is only point out where the differences are statistically valid. And this saves going through pages after pages after pages, because we know from CNN or whatever news thing, and they'll say, this is plus or minus 3%. Well, this takes care of that for you, so that if you want to know, are you doing better among a certain group of people or not as well during a certain group of people, this will tell you where the opportunities lie. If you want to make a change, is there a segment of your visitor who is bringing your ratings down? We look at gender, we look at age group, we look at the presence of young people along, we look at young people along, we look at first versus repeat visitors. That's a big one. So in addition to getting the benchmark, your ratings, we don't stop there. We get your ratings in context, and we also get your ratings, is there a group of people pulling you down, in which you might have to look at things a little differently, and then what actually is most critical to your museum for the visitor standpoint. I'm going to talk a little bit about some recent participants that I've been working with a little bit after they've gotten their data. And this is from the Institute for Texan Cultures. It is in San Antonio. It is part of the university, and they are they're a site that talks about all the different diverse groups that make up Texas. So when you visit their site, there's a section on the Irish and a section on the Germans and so forth. And they're getting ready to re-look at, reevaluate the way their museum is set up. And so they walked into visitors count with some preconceived notions that they had expected to be validated. And instead, what happened is it started steering them in a different direction. They were making decisions based on that people wanted to know more about their own history, but found that most visitors already know something about their own history, and they're really far more interested in the history of others, and they would come away saying, I had no idea. So instead of changing the whole way they're looking at things, they liked the setup that it was already there, but what they're doing is enhancing that, and they're enhancing their messaging. And I can't remember what their message, find yourself here, was their old tagline, and they're now changing it to include looking around you and looking to see who else is part of Texas. So what this did was not only kind of change their minds about revamping their exhibit layout, but they ended up saving a whole bunch of money that they can be used for marketing and things of that sort. Another example that I have is a kind of a gallery design example, and this is from another museum which I cannot identify, and they have used this survey information to inform decisions on all sorts of things, and that's really what Visitors Count was designed to do, is to give you a broad swath across how are you doing from the perspective of your visitor. So they're using it in all these different areas that I have listed, but I went ahead and pulled the example that they sent us from the gallery design. And one of the things that they had found was that their particular visitors were really interested in uncomfortable aspects of history being explored. So I remember when chatting with them, and they came to a meeting in Nashville, and I said, "This means you get to go there. You know, some of those potentially scary topics that you might have shied away from. This tells you go there." And so they are now putting an exhibit that they internally tended to overlook. They're now putting more effort into that exhibit and directing people to it and enhancing it. And so they're using it in terms of also supporting their museum's vision in the redesign project, which is a little bit the opposite of what we talked about with ITC. These guys are using it to make changes where ITC learned that the things that they thought needed changing really didn't need to be changed. Enhanced, sure. Changed, no. Applewood is a site in Flint, Michigan, and it is an estate of Ruth Mott, and so they had originally only really had events and special things periodically. It says in the text, open for an event once a month, and then by appointment occasionally to and only by appointment then. Now they're open 4 days a week, 6 months a year, and they're opening the historic house for tours for the first time. And we did a lot of work. I know Sherry talked a minute about the Spotlight Survey. And what the Spotlight Survey does is it takes an aspect of something that you've learned from the visitors count overview, that broad swath, and it lets you turn the spotlight on one particular area. So what we worked with them is the area of tours and tours of the house. And so the information that they got from the wider visitors count gate visitors program changed the way they looked at their operation, and then the spotlight helped them drill down on what needed to be in that tour and how that needed to work. And she said the only way this could have happened was through visitors count because of the preconceived notions by the board of trustees. So that's working very well for them. There's a couple other slides of some sites who've gone through our program, some nice things that they've said about us. And then I will, in a second, turn it back over to Sherry.
Thanks, Deb. So looking at the 3 survey options and the fees, you can see that the gate visitor and the teacher surveys, the program fee is $3,750, and that fee is payable in 2 installments. So for most organizations, those the 2 payments are often in 2 different fiscal years, which seems to really help a lot of organizations. They pay the first half when they start in the program, and then the second half of the fee is not due until we deliver the final report to the museum. We've had a number of organizations participate in Visitors Count because they've been able to get grant funding through either a private foundation, a community foundation. Once in a while, a state humanities council will even have some type of special funding initiative that allows organizations to apply for Visitors Count because they're collecting visitor feedback and data that the museum needs. And recently, in I'd say the past 2 or 3 years, we've also had a number of organizations receive funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So there is grant funding available. Visitors count is very comprehensive, and you can see from the examples that Deb presented of how organizations have been able to use the program. If visitors count won't work for you for some reason, there is a non-fee option that it's not visitors count, it's not comprehensive like this program is, so it doesn't do the same things. But if you are interested in looking at it on the AASLH website, if you'll go to that and down on the left rail of options, if you click on communities and look for the small museums community, there is a link on there to a webinar we did several years ago where we talked about a survey instrument that you can use for free, and you can adapt it however you want. So it's a way to get started in collecting visitor feedback, a little bit more than what typical comment cards might do for a site. So look on the ASLH website if you're interested in that option, because it does have the survey instrument and a webinar that tells you how to use it and some other information. But visitors count, as Deb has explained, is very comprehensive. We give you lots of benchmarks and the full report on all of your data. Deb does lots of analysis and slicing and dicing of the data. And so again, the fees are on the screen, and it is payable in 2 installments, so which makes it easier for some organizations. Let's see. Let's take a couple of questions before we wrap up. Let's see. Deb, if you'll turn your microphone on, I'll read the question and I'll let you respond if it's more appropriate for you.
Okay.
So
I just got done.
Jessica Jessica's asking, she says she has a quick question. Oh, okay. You're asking about the webinar. Yes. Jessica, we will be posting the recording up on the ASLH website on the visitors count page, but also I will be sending out the link to the recording by tomorrow afternoon. Everyone should have it. So you will receive the recording link. The next question is, Helen is asking, she said, your examples of quantitative feedback reporting are impressive. Do you also collect qualitative feedback, and do you also do focus groups? So Deb, do you want to take the first one about qualitative feedback?
I do, actually.
Okay.
So while we don't actually do and conduct the focus groups, we worked really closely. Applewood did this, as a matter of fact, and we helped develop the moderator's guide. And the other thing that we did was we collected, and I know qualitative is very different than quantitative, but we developed kind of a little mini survey that they did and handed out during the focus groups to different people who qualified for the focus groups because they'd never been to Applewood, for example, or they were uncomfortable with something or something of that sort. And what we did was we helped compile that data, and we gave them a report that was not quantitative, but it did talk about the differences and the obstacles that some of these folks might encounter. So we used it in conjunction with, but as far as going and conducting and being a moderator, the answer is no. But we're certainly part of the process, if you'd like us to be.
Deb, can you talk a bit about open-ended questions?
I sure can. We do ask a handful of open-ended questions, and we've learned over time that the key drivers are very different from one site to another, but there's a couple of things that tend to come up more frequently than others. One is exceeding expectations or falling short, and we've learned that impact is important. So we've developed some open-ended questions. That's what if anything was better than you expected? What if anything was disappointing, and what, if anything, was of particular impact to you and your family, so that we do in fact collect on the spot some clarification of what's behind some of those, what we know are particularly strong key drivers in a lot of cases. So we do in fact combine qualitative. I think of quantitative as the measuring part, and you have to do it over time to know if you're improving, and you have to do this. But the qualitative or the open-ended verbatim stuff helps one understand what's behind those things. And because we've collected demographics on the same questionnaire, we can sort and look at how do first-time visitors answer those questions? How do people with children answer those questions? And so on. So it's not a focus group per se, but it is certainly qualitative supporting the quantitative.
Great. Thanks, Deb. If you have other questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. So for the visitors count fee, the things that you receive, I've got one slide up and we'll review this real quick and then go on to the next one. You do receive the one-time use of the survey instrument. We work with you to add custom questions, so you do get to ask visitors questions that are specific to special concerns you have about your museum or site. We have a program handbook that goes along with it. And then I'm in contact with you throughout the project. Both Deb and I coordinate all of your survey, making sure that you receive your survey instrument once the custom questions are finished. And so we are guiding you through the process of you collecting the surveys from visitors. So we do not come out to the site as the surveys are being distributed and collected from visitors, but we are guiding you by email and phone. And then once all of your surveys are collected and they're shipped to Nashville, Deb goes to work on all of the data entry, the processing, the analysis, and then she prepares the final report and sends it to you electronically. We have a one-day meeting that we hold, typically in Nashville, and it's an opportunity for you to come to the meeting. There's no charge for it, but you are responsible for your own travel expenses. But we spend a day talking about how to interpret your report, how to feel comfortable presenting the results to others, which is so critical, and how to think about next steps. What are you going to do with the data? We have worksheets that we fill out with you and help you begin to think about next steps. And so that meeting, you arrive the evening before, and we adjourn in time for most people to fly out that evening. But it's a very, very helpful meeting. Most of our participants, they do attend the meeting, and they tell us that it's critical for them in understanding and being able to present the results to others. You also receive, as I said, the worksheets that we work with you during the meeting. We provide templates for presenting the information to boards of directors and full staff and others. And then we also stay in touch with you by email if you have questions. There are opportunities for additional advice or more in-depth consulting. We have some organizations that actually bring Deb on site to present the report to their board or their full staff. And so then we also preserve your data for future repeat surveys. We have a number of organizations that have used Visitors Count 2, 3, 4. I think we even have one site that has used it 5 times. So having that baseline of data to then compare in the future with repeat surveys is important, so that you know whether or not the changes you're making have the impact that you want them to have. Let's see. What else? Anybody have any other questions? Other questions? Deb, did you see any other questions come up?
I did.
Oh, okay, here's one. Okay.
And I thought I would, rather than type in a quick answer, I thought I would wait and actually chat about it.
Okay.
Um, so Olivia asked if the surveys are done on paper, or is it possible to have an electronic version? We are paper, and we are paper for several reasons. One is a lot of the visitors who come still don't have tablets. They might be over a certain age, whatever. The other thing is if we switch to electronic, we will lose the ability to do the benchmarking because those groups of visitors who are comfortable with using their personal device to do it may be very different from the kinds of people we get a pretty good, we don't track response rates specifically, but we hear back from you guys after you've gone through it that most people are, if they're presented, and Sherry helps with a good script, and they feel important, they're happy to do it. Maybe there's a small thank you, like maybe a lemonade on the front porch or something of that sort. And if they take that survey, that questionnaire, we lose very few. They fill them out. They're very good about it. We provide envelopes so they can put them in an envelope, and it's very secret, and hand them back. And so at this point, that's what we're doing. Given the audience still going to museums and recognizing the value of benchmarking, which would be in jeopardy if we made the switch.
And Deb, here's a question from Elizabeth. She said, can you tell us what the baseline number of questions is?
I think it's 28 rating questions. I might be off by one or two rating questions because we've added some over time. Then we have maybe 10 demographic questions, and then we have 3 or 4 open-ended questions. And that's the basic template. Then, of course, you get to ask some custom questions because we know not all museums are in the same situation. So everybody wants to know something specifically about what's going on, and we also make it possible to buy an extra question or 2 or 7. We've had a couple of sites who've been through the program more than once that we try to limit it to 3 pages. A little booklet works really well with visitors. It's manageable. They seem to like it. And then we go from there. So, how many visitor? Let me go to the. Does it take 5 to 10 minutes?
Right.
Helen, you asked that, and it takes an average of 12 minutes. And we know that. Some people will skip a couple of the open ends if nothing was disappointing. They'll put a 0 or something of that sort. But that's how long it takes. And we've also found that if somebody's got kids with them, and some of the sites, people at some of the sites are concerned that people with kids won't fill out the questionnaire. So there's like a coloring page that Sherry has found that the kids see that, and then the kids get the color, and mom or dad or both of them fill out the questionnaire.
And as Deb mentioned, the incentive or token of appreciation is really important to offer visitors something. I know many of you are probably like me. You go to a museum, and after I've been there a while, as I'm getting ready to leave, I'm thinking, I'm kind of hungry, I'm thirsty, especially on a hot summer day. So offering the visitor a small bottle of cold water and a miniature candy bar, or we've had really creative ideas. Some Alaskan museums gave out little cans of salmon. If you have a locally made product like a potato chips or something like that, visitors love that, and they're very happy to spend the average 12 minutes to fill out the survey in exchange for, as Deb said, a cup of lemonade on the front porch of a historic house or something like that. So for the teacher survey, it is a little bit different. The teachers mail the survey directly to Nashville, and so they are 99% of the time the participating organizations choose to either hand the survey to the teachers as they're departing, or they mail it to them afterwards. So the teacher survey does work a bit differently. Couple last things I wanted to say, and if anyone has additional questions, you can go ahead and post them. Oh, I see someone asked, how many visitor intercepts does it typically take to gather 200 responses? I don't have a hard and fast number on that, but I would say it's probably around 230, 250. Most people are very happy to fill out the survey. So it's not real difficult. Uh, Most of the time, if we have a participating museum that's having difficulty, then the number one thing is, what are you offering as a token of appreciation? And a lot of times it's something like a coupon for the gift shop, which is great if you pair it with a bottle of water. If it's just that by itself, you might have to change, and then you'll find that the museum, I'm sorry, that the people are more willing to fill out the survey. I do want to mention real quickly that we also, if anyone's interested, we also work with groups of museums or sites. We are currently working with 13 historic sites in the state of Tennessee. The Tennessee Historical Commission wants to establish a baseline of data for those 13 historic sites. So we are working with them, and when we work with a group like that, you get some additional benefits. Not only does each site get their individual report, but they get an aggregate report. And so we've worked with groups of museums in Kentucky and Texas and Alaska in the past. So if anyone's interested in that, you are more than welcome to send me an email and set up a time that we can talk about that. We want to close out the webinar by just saying that if you are interested in doing visitors count, the next group is going to start June the 5th. And so June the 5th, that week, we will begin working with organizations. We'll do an orientation. It's like a 1-hour orientation online in AASLH's classroom. And then we start working one-on-one with each museum to figure out what their custom questions will be that will be added to the survey. And we work with you to be ready to distribute the surveys. And so we shoot for around July 10th. Some organizations are ready sooner. Some may choose to wait until a little further into July. But and so those organizations will survey through November 15th, and then they will receive their report next April. If you're not ready this in June to begin the process, the next visitor survey group will begin next February, right in mid-February, and that group will survey in the spring and summer months, and they will receive their reports in November. So there's opportunities twice each year to do the gate visitor survey, and then once each year to do the teacher survey. And that teacher survey will begin in mid-August, and it follows the school year as teachers bring classes on site for a program. And so you collect surveys in both the fall and the spring, and then you receive your report next August or September. So that is a full year program, and the goal that you're looking for is up to 100 teacher surveys is what we'll process for the fee. So if you are interested, call me or drop me an email, and I would be more than happy to send you the program agreement. We do have an agreement that specifies everything that we provide to you and what you're responsible for. And then once we receive that signed agreement, we get started with you. As I said, we'll begin around June the 5th for organizations that want to survey this summer and fall. And we provide all of the guidance and help you along the way so that you can learn more about your visitors. So that's all I have. And Deb Wilcox, thank you so much. I also want to recognize Natalie in the ASLH office. Natalie is a big help as we present the webinar. She's in the background providing tech help and advice. And so thank you, Natalie. Thanks,
Especially
Deb.
to Deb.
Deb, you have anything else you want to say real quick?
I don't. Just thank you, Natalie, for helping me out. And yeah, follow up with any questions between Sherry and myself. We are more than happy to do what we can.
Right. And I did post the link to the client list in the chat box. You can go and see the other organizations that have done visitors count. And like I said earlier, I will be sending the recording out to everyone who registered so that if you want to review the webinar, you can. So we will close out, and thanks again for participating, everyone. Bye-bye.